So welcome to Module 4. We're going to bring it all together with deeper learning. And we're going to think about what might be a plan for modern learning in our classroom. And ultimately, we're going to bring that to the space of looking at the science of learning development. You might come to learn and know this as SOLD. So what is deeper learning? And how have folks been engaged in this work? Well, esteemed colleague that we mentioned earlier, Dr. Linda Darling-Hammond, out of the Learning Policy Institute, alongside with Jeannie Oakes, wrote an amazing book. It helps teachers think about how could we prepare for this space. You know, many of us know the work of 21st century skills, but how do we even go deeper in terms of the relevancy and the ways that we connect with students' learning? And one thing that we talked about earlier is the learning settings, the spaces in which students learn. You know, we've learned a lot in this pandemic. We've learned a lot in the space of what some call vitamin N. You're probably wondering what I mean by that. How is she making this connection? Well, vitamin N is vitamin nature. Students have actually been out in nature, learning, coming up with new ways of learning, and teachers are bringing that back into the classroom. They're constructing complex problems. They're finding problems of practice that they want to solve, and this learning is becoming incredibly relevant. They're doing this in the context also of social-emotional learning, the caring, and doing it in a space where we are warm demanders in a classroom. So in addition to that book, there's a great policy brief that actually has tons and tons of strategies that you might think about as a teacher. It helps us think about, in this deeper learning space, how do we help students collaborate? So incredibly important. How do we help students communicate what they're learning and communicate with others? You know, a lot of folks call those the soft skills. In many ways, I think they're the hardest skills, right? Knowing how to pick up on those nuances, to manage the impulsivity in a group. Wait a minute. I'm starting to sound like I'm talking about social-emotional learning again. In fact, I am. That's a critical component to this work. And how students engage in the problem solving. There has been an abundance of problem solving in this environment. Not only ways that we've seen adults model problem solving, but our students have been very active in their work. They've had a strong sense of agency. So reflect for a moment as you think about these policy components and your own classroom practices. How have you really engaged in deeper learning in a way that helps students do these things and really exercise their agency? Jot down some notes and let's come back to them. So what did you write? What does it look like in this environment? You know, there's a great poet, Tupac Shakur, that talks about concrete and roses. There's an amazing school ran by Dr. Jeff Duncan Andrade. And he talks about how we do this work in deeper learning practices with an immense ability to care deeply about our students. And of course, being warm demanders. Without saying too much, I'm going to ask you to turn to your learning guide. There's a 13-minute video. You will come back inspired. I want you to jot down 3 key ideas that will bring back to the conversation and that I hope you will text to one of your teaching partners later as you think about deeper learning through an equity lens. Let's take a look. I know I am incredibly inspired every time I hear this story. What light do we bring to our classroom? What water do we bring to our classroom? How do we change the soil conditions in our classroom? How do we accelerate these opportunities and make sure that they are not uncommon, but they become common practice in our classroom? How are we unapologetic about leading with love with an equity lens? It said a lot of things. It meant a lot of things. And it matters for many reasons. But ultimately, to whom does it matter? You know, this same strategy we use frequently in classrooms when we work with complex texts and complex ideas, just like deeper learning practices. So maybe reflect back on this video and say, what did Dr. Duncan Andrade say? What does it mean? Why does it matter for you today in your classroom? And to whom will you share this with? Let's use that same frame to go even deeper. You know, deeper learning took us to a very powerful place. And the science of learning development has built upon that work. And this newly released report actually takes what we know about deeper learning practices, an incredible response to an equity lens, and what we know about brain research and the intricacies of social-emotional learning into one space. Now, there's a lot of information here. Here's what I'm going to encourage you to do. I'd love you to take a look at your module and go to this website around the science of learning development. What you're going to find is each one of these components has resources around curriculum, instruction, strategies that teachers can use immediately in their classroom, and also a way to say, hey, good job, I've been doing some of this. I should have been the author on that report. Take a look at this SOLD report. And again, ask yourself, what does it say? What does it mean? And why does it matter? So let's learn more about some of these essential guiding principles. You know, the emerging science tells us an optimistic story about the potential of all learners. There's burgeoning knowledge about the biological systems that govern development, including deeper understandings of brain structure, their wiring, and the connections to other systems and the external world. This research tells us that brain development and life experiences are interdependent and malleable. That is, the settings and conditions individuals are exposed to and immersed in affect how they grow throughout their lives. So straight from the curators of the SOLD work, tells us that the brain and development are coupled with a growing knowledge base from educational research. And this provides us with an opportunity to design systems in which all individuals are able to experience transformative learning. Let's take a look at our module and think about, what do those essential guiding practices mean for our classrooms in our community? We'll come back together shortly. Well, is that toolbox full? My hunch is it's getting a little heavy. So decide what you want to put in that tool belt and know that you can always go back to that toolbox, or perhaps you need to make some investments in more learning with the tool chest in your system. So we've covered a lot of territory together in these 4 modules, from a mindset to a way of being, and really looking at our practice in our classroom. So today's learning has been organized with a triple track agenda in mind. So what does that mean? 1, there's been strategies here to support you as a learner. Track 2, there's been strategies here to support you in supporting other adult learners. Perhaps you might take this back and have a conversation with your principal. Perhaps you might join that next committee and be a part of the planning. Maybe it might be some professional development you lead with your department. Track 3 is all about our students, that team kid spirit. I think it's probably the most important track. How might you take these strategies back to your classroom? Maybe it's the buddy up strategy. Maybe it's using a say, mean, matter chart with a piece of literature. Maybe it's about getting out and getting some vitamin N, some nature, and really doing some deeper learning out in our community and bringing it back to the bricks and mortar of the classroom or the virtual space that you might be in. So how do we carry all of these lessons forward? Maybe we need a new container for our thinking. Well, here's what I would say. I'm going to label it as modern learning. You know, we've talked so much about the different ways that we can learn. But what is it going to be defined as for you in your practice? So if you were to take your lessons learned and your lessons that you will continue to carry forward, what would you tell folks about what learning means for you in this modern state? What does it mean in your classroom? Does it mean understanding your global collaborators, your innovative designers, that culture of caring? Is it about thinking about the quality of your planning in a different way, maybe with a warm demander mindset? Take some time to reflect. Because we know that we don't just learn from having an experience together, but most importantly, we learn from reflecting on the experience together. You know, in over 30 years of teaching experience and many more to come, I always go back to my first year as a teacher. And there's a poem that found its way to me. You know how there's kind of like those serendipitous moments and you're like, where did this come from? But I know it was supposed to find me. Well, this one came in a form of a poem. And still to this day, I don't know who the author is. I've Google searched. I've researched. If you find these words somewhere, please send them back to me and let's continue the conversation. But this poem stays on the cover of my professional portfolio still to this day. Here's the poem from my heart. One teacher. One teacher can make a difference. One teacher can destroy the heart and mind of one child or many children. One teacher can instill a feeling of hope and dignity that will surmount the tragedies of poverty, of prejudice, and of futility. Unfortunately, we go no further than the nearest classroom to already find a child beaten by life, a child who already knows that he or she or they is nobody. But just one teacher, you're that one teacher, can help him feel that he or she or they is somebody. Again, you are a hero, and we thank you for what you do each and every day in the lives of your students. Again, as an educator, you have no choice but to be a hero. The only choice you have is to decide what kind of hero you are going to be. Thank you for joining me in this Team Kid journey, and I look forward to hearing about your superhero journeys.